It is my pleasure to introduce Glen Peel. Glen and I have been neighbors for over 20 years now. We were in the same ward in Sanpete. We lived between Mount Pleasant and Spring City. In an industrial accident, I don't know how many years, I think 30 years ago or so?
35 years.
35 years ago, he had an industrial accident and lost his eyesight, and it dealt with anhydrous ammonia. So we've asked him to come and share his experience. He's done this with other companies as well. Share his experience and give us a little feeling of the dangers. In fact, the title of this presentation is Dangers of Ammonia and Lessons Learned. Glen has led an amazing life since then. He is a very successful business owner. If any of you know much about Mount Pleasant, he's the owner of the Horseshoe Mountain Hardware Store there. He and his wife, Tina, have a beautiful family, 3 boys and 2 girls.
Great.
And he's my elders quorum president right now. I was Glen and Tina's home teacher for, 15, 20 years or something?
For a while. 2 words worth.
Back in the old days when we did home teaching. But Glen, you're semi-retired now from the store, aren't you?
Sold it to my son John, our son John. So yeah, retired. But we'll talk about that in a minute. How's that?
This is what he does in his spare time, or some of his spare time. He invited the young men over to a big shop that he has behind his home and showed us a monster truck that he's working on.
Well, I built that all myself. I'm an okay welder and a professional grinder, I tell people. So you think about that for a minute. We'll talk about that maybe at the end. We'll see how much time we have. Okay, David, my turn?
Your turn.
All right, I'm going to put my eyes on the floor. I'm probably the only guy that can get away with that. So I got to say in the beginning, I appreciate us starting with prayer. That thrills me. I told some of the people here beforehand that back in the day when I was selling farm machinery, and I'd get up in places, Washington State and the Dakotas, where the church was obviously the least of their things they're thinking about. Why they wanted to start their parties out with some alcohol. So I'm thrilled, or their meetings. So this is wonderful. So I appreciate being here. I haven't done this for probably 10 years, so if I'm a little rusty, I apologize on that. But I hope that the presentation I can give can have some meaning to you guys. We're talking about anhydrous ammonia for me today. So I'll kind of tell you a little bit about what happened to me and what got me to that point, and a little of the history and the experiences I had, and then we can have some question and answers that might be pertinent. So I went to Utah State University, got off my mission in 1978, and my love has always been agriculture. I loved ag, I loved mechanics, I loved working on equipment. So I went and got my degree, started my degree in ag mechanics at Utah State University, which is, there's not too many programs like that in the country, but that's what I started there. Met my wife, Tina, there. She's from Randolph. If you guys know where Randolph is, over by Bear Lake, coldest place in the state. And so we met at Utah State, we're married, finished my bachelor's there, and then stayed in ag education, ag mechanization, and then that didn't work out. There wasn't any jobs then back in the early 80s, and so I stayed and got a master's degree in agronomy. And so then I had the opportunity to get a job with the Yielder Drill Company, and no-till. It's let's see. I guess Dave, you can flash those pictures up. Just might be of interest to people. These were back in the day, cutting technology at the time. 40 years ago. These big machines, we'd go right into the grain stubble of the previous crop, plant, put the seed, the fertilizer, and all the chemicals all down at once. And this was right up my alley driving. I was thrilled to drive a 400 or 500 horsepower tractor with a 100,000 pound piece of farm machinery behind me, and we could plant, some of these machines could plant 1,000 acres of grain a day. And so we worked with farmers. I worked with large farms, 4,000 to 50 and 60, well, about 50,000 was the largest I worked with. But they'd plant, some of these guys would plant 3,000 or 4,000 acres of grain a day with these machines. And so one of the things that they used a lot, because it's a cheap source of fertilizer, of nitrogen fertilizer, is anhydrous ammonia. It's 82% pure nitrogen, and so it was a very inexpensive source of nitrogen fertilizer for farmers. And one of these, several of these machines, I think the picture we picked, the little one's is just a research model for the university, but the other two, the big propane tanks are on the front of anhydrous are on the front of the tractor, and one of the others got some anhydrous tanks on the back of the machine. So typically they were carrying between 500 and 1,000 gallons of anhydrous.
So this big white tank here?
Big white tanks, yeah.
That's an anhydrous.
Anhydrous ammonia, yeah. So white tanks either on the front of the tractor or on the back of the yielder drill were anhydrous. And so that's not all of them had anhydrous, but a large portion of them did, just because of the economics of it for agriculture, for these big farms. This machine would, it had a unit that would quick cool the anhydrous down. Some of you guys might know, I forgot the exact number. What's the temperature it goes to when I forget what it was. 180 degrees below zero or something when once released into the air. I forget the temperature.
Normal air pressure, it's minus 23.
Minus 20.
Boils at minus 23
Okay.
Fahrenheit.
Yeah. All right. So there's your number. I wasn't sure what it was. So nonetheless, they had a cooler that would, they wanted to cool it off, so they had an expansion tank that would allow it to expand, and that would cool it before we injected it into the ground. And one of the reasons that anhydrous worked so well in an agricultural situation was it would seek that extra hydrogen off of water in the ground, and then it would convert to a stable product with that extra hydrogen. And so they like to use that in areas where there was enough moisture. And so we wanted to inject it in as cold as possible into the ground. One of the problems that they had with these machines was that they shipped a lot of this anhydrous bulk. You know, most of these farmers would they'd bring it in on semi trucks, which they would bring from rail cars, and they'd ship a lot of the anhydrous on the same tanks as they ship propane. So there was a lot of rust, and the anhydrous would pull the rust off of the inside of the tanks from the propane. And so that's a little history on that. I think I want to take a minute and just tell you a little bit about the day that I got hurt and a little bit beforehand, so that you can kind of get a picture of what was going on, and I'll explain why here in a minute. But I was a scoutmaster, and so we'd taken the scouts out the night before on a Friday night, camping. We canoed out to an island and camped on an island, and then I came back that morning on a Saturday morning with the kids, took them home, and then our ward was building a new baseball field behind the church, so I went and helped on that for a few hours, and I came home, I don't know, probably 4:30, and one of the farmers that had one of these machines, who would talk us into moving to an area west of Blackfoot, right along the Snake River, out in the potato fields. He'd bought a machine. He used it there on his irrigated farm, and then he had a big dry farm up by Soda Springs. But he was having a few problems with his anhydrous, and I knew what his problem was because there's little orifices in this supercooler that plug up, and they were relatively new at the machine. So I knew what the problem was, and I told the teen I'll be home about 5 o'clock for dinner. And it was just 5 miles or so from our house where he lived, and went down. His son was running the machine. And so I stopped, and he came to the end of the field and stopped, and with his, it was a machine similar to one of these bigger ones that we showed pictures of there. And so I hopped out. We shut the valves off to the propane, or to the anhydrous tanks, and bled everything out, I thought, except one hose that was 1 inch in diameter and 10 feet long. And and I'll tell you, I didn't have my safety equipment on either, okay? I'll talk about that in a minute. But I did not have my safety equipment on. So then he followed the Spirit. Now I can say that here to you guys today. I can't say that in a lot of the places I've done presentations, but he moved his equipment for his anhydrous out in front of the machine. It was right out on the front of the machine, and that's probably what saved my life. But so I got up on the top of the machine. I could actually reach down over and do it. I took all these big 1/2-inch bolts out because it's I think about 2,000 psi. Tell me if I'm wrong. What's the pressure? Do you know on that? Some of you guys?
Depends. I don't know how you would pressurize it, or it depends on how they.
In the storage tank,
I guess.
Yeah. So I was always told it's about 2,000 psi, and I might be wrong, but nonetheless, you know, those tanks are mighty thick, and all the equipment was very heavy that it was worked on. The hoses were just massive. For a 1-inch diameter hose was, you know, almost 2 inches in diameter for what we were using. But nonetheless, I got all the big, there was a whole string of bolts on a plate that I had to take off to get access, and I pulled those off, and I couldn't get it off, and so I told him, just throw me up a hammer, and I was up about 8 feet in the air, and I remember he threw me the hammer, and I just remember grabbing that handle, the hammer, I caught it in midair, went back and swung, hit that lid, you know, and just to loosen it up. And it blew, and the lid went past me, and there were just, probably, I don't know, 8 ounces of anhydrous. Well, there's probably more than that. Less than a pound of anhydrous ammonia anyway. It went right by me. It didn't hit me directly in the face. It went right by me, but froze my face, my whole head instantly to a block of ice. Instantly. And I felt, and I was frozen solid. I was chewing big red gum. I don't know, I remember that, but I was. I kind of spit some of that out, but it was, you know, chunks of it. It was frozen solid. And I knew at that instant I was going to be blind. And I can tell you that, but I told the Lord, I said, if you'll let me live, I'll do everything I can to bless other people's lives. So we were 35 miles from the closest hospital. We're out in the farm country. The guy, the farmer, he was a pretty husky guy, and my truck was right there, and so he knew we needed to get water to it, so he took me, well, he couldn't get my passenger door of my truck unlocked. He was in shock worse than I was. Well, he got me down. I couldn't see at that point. My eyes were frozen. And he came up on the machine and got me down. We had to go across a bunch of equipment in the back, and harrows and things were hooked on. But anyway, he literally threw me in the back of the pickup because he couldn't get me in. He drove down the road about a half mile, and he got on, and then he got the garden hose and was trying to spray me off, but I just took my breath away. I couldn't hardly survive that. But that's probably helped me quite a bit. But nonetheless, then he called for the ambulance there, and then they agreed on a meeting spot halfway between the hospital and us, and where the ambulance was. And so I don't remember. I remember getting in the ambulance, but then I don't remember anything for a day or two. But they told Tina that I might be dead when she got to the hospital, but I wasn't. Nonetheless, my head was as big as my shoulders, if you get an idea. Is that about right, Tina? Yeah.
Purple.
So anyway, sorry, so I was blessed. They took care of my lungs. I really have no problem with my lungs at all. But one of the things they did not do is irrigate my eyes. The doctor, I don't know, he probably didn't know about anhydrous. He just pried my eyes open, they looked fine. But anhydrous is seeking that for that. It loves moisture, loves water. It seeks water for that extra hydrogen it's looking for. Since it's, everyone know what anhydrous means? You probably can explain that.
Dehydrated.
It's looking for that extra hydrogen is the simplest way I can describe it. It's liking the hydrogen, and so it's liking that hydrogen to make it a stable molecule. That's what makes it so great for a refrigerant in reality, is because it can expand and cool quickly, but it's looking for that extra hydrogen, and so that's anhydrous. It's liking that hydrogen is really the biggest way. So being an alkali chemical, there's a lot of other alkali chemicals that are out there that you guys probably work with all the time too, but lime is the only one I'll mention in cement. Will eat your skin, and that's the alkali chemical, but similar type reaction. So nonetheless, they did not irrigate my eyes. If they would have irrigated my eyes, I would probably still had some problems, but not as near as much. They did not irrigate my eyes at all. If they would have irrigated my eyes probably for 24 hours, I'd have probably had very little damage, well, minimal damage to my eyes. But that didn't happen, which is what happened, and that's okay. I've dealt with that, so it's all right. I was released from the hospital 3 days later, which was in a way a miracle from what happened to me. And then a few days after that, we had an appointment with the eye doctor in Pocatello, Idaho, and he was absolutely furious because of the way my eyes were deteriorating quickly, and sent me immediately to Salt Lake City, and they operated. And a lady who was not a member of the church operated on me, and she did an operation that she had seen done but had never done. She had seen it done in another country. I want to say Colombia, but I might be wrong. But she was there as a foreign exchange student of some kind, and she saw this operation done. They take more than just the cornea; they go clear out into the sclera, and clear out into the white of the eye, I guess is the easiest way to say it. And so they did that and saved one of my eyes. I had little vision in that eye until about 4 years ago, and I'm completely black. So I have no vision at all now. So one of the things that I wanted to say as that experience went on is they gave me some typical ointment for burns at the hospital because, you know, by that time my skin was all turning red. And we went to the pharmacy to pick that up, and the pharmacist told Tina, don't give that to him. Get pure vitamin E oil and put on his face. And that was one of the small miracles that happened to us, was that pharmacist doing that. Tina put vitamin E oil on my face and my hands where I got burned many times a day. I don't know how many she did, Tina, but a whole bunch. She took extra good care of me as a 25-year-old mother with 3 boys. And my boys were 6, 4, and 2. Our oldest had turned 6 1 week before I got blinded. But that was April 19th, 1986. I'll never forget that day. But nonetheless, this vitamin E oil, my skin gradually turned black and then just fell off in huge chunks. And I had baby skin underneath, and I've told several people, if you want to get rid of your freckles and get the younger skin again, we could recommend a solution, but nobody's taken me up on it yet, an anhydrous bath. So, a few things then. That kind of gives you an overview of what happened to me, and so a few little things that I think are important to me, and hopefully it might have meaning to you. I don't know if any of you ever got burned with anhydrous or hurt with, you know, but if any of it, a lot of farmers, these farmers had, their whole legs were covered with purple scars, their arms. It was just, I was amazed to find out how many people have been drenched with anhydrous somehow. And so I have 0 purple scars. You know, my skin is not purple, which is the normal thing that happens with anhydrous. So I relate that to this pharmacist that was inspired to tell Tina use vitamin E oil. So I'll just give that as something, if you ever have that, to remember that. But then the other thing for training situation and maybe even for doctors if it ever needs to be done, is lots of water. Water, and then that's pulling that anhydrous, the chemical out of the skin, and getting that water to it, and it just dilutes it, I guess, and reduces the amount of injury that can be caused by it. So those are 2 medical things that I think are important. Water, you know, and we knew that, and Terry Hopkins, who was the son of the farmer who was the one that took me, he knew that, you know, he sprayed me off with the garden hose, which helped, I'm sure, immensely. But again, my lungs were froze, and I was having a hard time breathing. So the blessing there took care of my lungs, but the Lord didn't want to take care of my eyes. So He's got a reason for me to be blind, which is fine. I've accepted that, and I carry on. So back then to my accident, I didn't wear my safety equipment. Now, I had some training, very little, granted. I will say that. They told me how dangerous it was, and you know, I was young. I was 26 when I got the training. I was 28 when this accident happened. That's 35 years ago. I guess I felt like I was pretty much invincible. I loved traveling. I loved operating this big equipment. I loved working with farmers all over the country. It was a great experience for me. But I didn't take my safety very serious. I will say that. Mainly because I don't think nobody impressed upon me the seriousness of the situation. And I'm not using that as an excuse. I'm just saying that maybe that's what it was. But in reality, I didn't take that too serious. So you guys that work with it here, I'm thrilled to have you. You know, you got the respirator equipment and stuff. I guess the key for me is to reiterate to anybody that's around it that it's a serious thing. And any of you that worked with it closely, where we were injecting into the ground every 15 or 20 inches, you know, in high volumes, you know, 20 or 30 gallons to the acre, and sometimes 50 or 100 gallons to the acre. We were in high volume of it, and I've had experiences where I couldn't run fast enough to get away from it. And it just took. You can't hold your breath and run away from anhydrous. Learned that. So I just run and then try and run the direction where it wasn't coming out, and so I remember well that, and yet I didn't really realize how dangerous it was even at that time. But I guess the thing that I would say is there's no heroes in anhydrous ammonia. It's kind of like methane gas. We just talked to a friend down in Phoenix area that one of his neighbors had buried a storage unit in the ground, and they had a flood, and the water ran through a corral, and so this storage unit was underground, was full of water tainted with manure, and when they pumped it out, then it was full of methane gas. He didn't realize that. He went in to finish cleaning it out and was overcome. Another person went after to save him. He died. The third person also died. 3 people died because they couldn't get out of methane gas. Anhydrous is similar to that. You can't hold your breath and go in and save somebody. So I guess that'd be one of my things is be safe, and that's for use your equipment. But if there's an accident, we need to get away from it. Get the right equipment, and then you go and, if somebody's there, rescue them, but with the proper equipment. Now, I know that's probably a minimal thing, but I think it's real. And then the other thing is, with anhydrous, is respect it. If there is a leak, and it gets water, what looks like water on the floor might be anhydrous. It's got enough moisture that it's still liquid there on the ground, and that's going to freeze you instantly. Then it gets more like pure liquid nitrogen, which is several hundred degrees below zero. And I think in my situation, the anhydrous, when it escapes into the air, it supercools it, and that's what these supercoolers do. And that's essentially what's happened to me, is it's coming through these nozzles and supercoolers. So they told me it was probably between 180 and 200 degrees below zero instantly when it got me. But now I don't know that for sure, so I'm not preaching that as gospel, but the point is, it's a cold product. So, safety is number one. Now, if I had been impressed upon me a little more on the safety, the reality of it, the danger, I would have had my safety equipment. If I'd had a face shield that I had in the truck and my rubber gloves, if I'd had my face shield and my rubber gloves on, yeah, I'd probably had a little problem with it, but I wouldn't be blind, and the lungs wouldn't have been damaged. They were in the truck, 100 yards away or 50 yards away, but I didn't have them on. So, for you guys, I guess, and your teams, and where you're working with it closely, wear the safety equipment. I can't emphasize that enough. And then people that are working, in culinary services, I think that's the right term, wherever, they need to understand a little bit about the reality of it. Not that they need to be afraid of it, just know that it's there, and if they smell it, they need to be away from it. I don't know what your procedures are. I'm sure you have plenty of procedures on that, but now understand that it's there. It's a tremendous product. It's so efficient, and it's environmentally safe. That's the beauty of it too. It's environmentally safe, but it is dangerous. So if you understand that, then it's not going to be something that you have to worry about if you're being aware of it, and then if there is a leak, get away from it. So safety training. I appreciate the opportunity to come and spend some time with you. I guess the thing, guys, is safety. Wear rubber gloves, respirators, face shields. If I'd have had a face shield on, like I said, I had that in the truck, and I had my rubber gloves, which I had on, or had in the truck. It was, it was pretty nice. It was a nice warm Saturday, and I was wanting to get done and get home to my family. And I told you about what I was doing before. Maybe I was a little tired. I can use that as an excuse, but really that I don't justify myself in that, except to say that sometimes the days we come to work or whatever, when we're extra tired, or we have that, is maybe when we're a little more susceptible to those things. So I just emphasize that safety is more important maybe at those times when we don't think we need it, or when we're not thinking about it the most. So that's really what I wanted to emphasize today too, is that when you think maybe you don't need it, or you're feeling extra safe, or you're feeling extra tired, not thinking is when you need it the most. So I don't know that does me any good to talk about any of the technical stuff. You guys know that, but really it's critical on just think safety, and I've taught a lot of young people over the years, and in farm classes in different places, farmers, and I guess that's the key. I think is think safety in everything you do. So. Questions, comments, things we ought to discuss here. What I think it's a great time to have forum about it, maybe. But what do you think? What comments, questions?
This is actually great timing, because right now the university is reviewing its ammonia procedures for the Culinary Support Center, putting in some steps in place on evacuations and things. Just this week we've been talking quite a bit about it.
Working on the detectors and everything.
Yeah, a detector probably get enough. I mean, like I say, I was running away from injectors that were all around, injecting large amounts, and so I remember running away from that. But my situation was confined to literally a small hose, well, in a unit. But still, yeah, that's fantastic. And
Can you explain that unit? Like, you took off like 4 bolts, and then that cap?
So it's a tube that's about 2 feet long, and it's basically an expansion tank. Think about expansion tank. So it's injecting that anhydrous into in small jets into a large tank, and then it expands out quickly, and then it's injected immediately there into the ground. And so essentially it's doing the same thing as you do when you freeze ice cream. Okay, I guess that's the easiest way to think about it. So instead of freezing the ice cream, these things will freeze up solid sometimes, and that's one of the problems we had, was if they weren't adjusted properly, they would freeze up too much and then freeze everything up, and you get 3 or 4 inches of ice on these, but then they would freeze up inside. So it was just essentially, it was an expansion tank, but it was intended to cool it so that when it went to the ground, it was cooler, and it took a little longer for it to evaporate out, and by that time they hoped that a higher percentage of it would be absorbed with some moisture, just become stable.
So this whole process was just fertilizing the crops, is that correct?
Well, again, these machines had the seed, so we had the seed that we'd inject. There was a disc that would put anhydrous ammonia or liquid nitrogen, depending on what they were using, and typically dry phosphate, sometimes liquid phosphate, and other chemicals, other fertilizers, into a narrow slot in the ground, and we put the seed to the sides. The idea was the seed was close to the fertilizer, so it was more efficient. But we were injecting the fertilizer right in the ground, and the seed was about 2 feet behind it and being put into slots in the ground. So we're putting everything in the ground that need for the whole crop for the whole year all in one pass. On this typically dry farms for the most part. So So, yeah, but it was an expansion tank that was plugged, and so these orifices would get plugged with rust, and so we just had to take them out. Inside of this was just some little nozzles we'd take out. And so being high pressure, I actually had 8 bolts around it, 8 3/8 bolts around about a 5-inch ring, steel ring that was about 3/4 of an inch thick, and it was pressed, wedged down in with a big plate, so it didn't, big steel rings that sealed it like a gasket. So
Was it vapor in the tank? Or
it was liquid.
Okay.
Liquid.
So it was condensed and then under pressure.
Yeah, so it's all liquid. We didn't do any vapor. We all did, it was all liquid. But the liquid would come, well, let's see. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're pulling liquid. But yeah, it had to be liquid because we couldn't pull that much volume off in vapor.
Yeah.
Yeah, it had to be liquid, and then it was just injecting it through these small ports into a big tank. Well, relative, larger area, then it was super cool. It's just kind of like a condenser on a car, or evaporator actually on the car, or your air conditioning, anything, the evaporator. Essentially a super evaporator. But then we could capture it, and then that cold product would be. So maybe, actually probably think compressor. I don't know how to think about that. That's what I think about air conditioning, but nonetheless.
Yeah, that's how my system works. It's just like the normal refrigeration system,
Yeah.
but and our pressure only goes up to maybe 160
Yeah.
psi.
Yeah.
That's,
We were using full tank pressure that.
yeah, they store a higher pressure than I guess it would be, and then it would flash at a much higher rate. It would expand super fast when you opened it up.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, and then it was coming through the ports too, so it was super cooling before it even got to me, so it was even colder. So, but nonetheless, it's still a safety issue, and it's a tremendous product. I would not recommend they changed anything else because I think the cost would be prohibitive, but because even the Freons are dangerous too, the new ones, I guess. But nonetheless, I just think, obviously most people smell that well, I shouldn't say most. It smells just like similar to the household ammonia, I guess is a good description, but it's not stable like that. So.
Once you smelled it,
Yeah, there's no question. And so safety, evacuation, I guess, get people out. But I would say that on the safety, if I was going to put part of the training, if somebody's down and there's a huge accident, don't go try and rescue your neighbor. If you don't have safety equipment on, I don't think you may not make it out with him or her. Go and get out, get safety equipment on, then go get that person. That's what if I was going to make any recommendation based on my experience.
Well, in all likelihood, they'd already be dead.
Well, not necessarily, but But I just remember I couldn't get away from it. But again, we were so.
Yeah, I can't remember how fast it expands, but it's much faster than you can run
Yep.
or an airplane can fly.
That's right.
Maybe even a bullet.
Yeah, I couldn't run fast enough, and the only thing I just remember one time that I was running away from it. This was just on the Utah-Idaho border out by Snowville, but so I actually ran towards the machine on the angle away because I knew which way the wind was blowing, and but nonetheless. So that's just a little safety on that. What other comments, questions, things that we could talk about that might be pertinent?
Just as a comment about people about outrunning it and things like that. Liquid ammonia has about an 850 to 1 expansion ratio.
Okay.
So you get a gallon of liquid, it transfers into 850 gallons of gas. So
Yeah.
it expands quite a bit.
Yeah, so you see, I didn't know that number. I knew it expanded lots. Yeah, so, yep.
Any other questions? We really want to thank Glen for coming on. sharing his experience with us. We, just as a thing, we have a BYU cap for you. It's khaki, you can hunt with that.
Yeah, well, I told my wife she didn't let me wear my jeans, and I should have wore a white shirt like you, but...
And here's a key ring, so once you have that monster truck of yours and you're driving it, it says safety on it. You put your key on that.
Well, have you seen the videos of me driving it? I drive everything I build out of the shop the first time, so...
He has a big field next to his house.
I go out around the 40-acre field and back, so... I have one that I started to build. It's just a 30-second video. It's called Blind Man Drives Truck on YouTube, and that's my oldest son. He thought I was going to run him over, and I just drove out 10 feet and stopped. So thanks.
Thanks. So.
Well, great. So yeah, if you're coming down Sanpete County and you want to see a truck with a 16 V71 Detroit on it,
Is that the?
Yeah, that's my machine.
That's the one that I had up on the.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I pulled the motor out yesterday. We're getting ready to paint it, so I've got a video of the hanging up over me it's about 12 feet in the air, and so it's pretty.
I put it up on the screen, and for some of you came in after we had this up before. This is Glen's project in his garage back behind his house.
I've been building this thing for 5 years. It's a 49 GMC panel van, and shortened 20 inches, and then it's a 16 V71 Detroit off a 35 kW generator with this Allison 740. So.
Do your boys take to mechanical and working on that thing too?
I've got one son that likes it and two that don't, but yeah, they help me. We've got a dozen other projects we're working on, but crazy blind guy. I like doing it. I like getting out and working and doing stuff. I don't mind just doing it. People say, how do you do it blind? I just do it. I don't know. I just like do it. I engineered that on my head, and it'll look a lot better once it's painted. The cab's pretty ugly, but sheet metal was built up in Tremont and hand built. I built foam panels, foam patterns of how I wanted the fenders made. So, and then he made them from my foam patterns. So, anyway.
Are you well blind,
You use it. A stick welder it's exactly what it is. Sticks for me. But I use a MIG welder, and I drag the nozzle. So I use long nozzles so that it's the tips up in the nozzle. So I drag the nozzle along whatever I'm working. So as long as I've got it angled right, the weld's the direction it's angled. So as long as I'm angled right and got well, I can move it a little bit, I was a pretty good welder before, but so I already kind of had the feel of that with a MIG welder, but sometimes it looks like chicken droppings, and then that's when the grinder comes in good. So anything that's technical or that's structural, I'll have my son or one of our other employees at the store weld it up, just obviously. But if it's something that's not, well, even sometimes the framework I made to lift my motor out, I welded all that up, but it's overbuilt. So I do a lot of welding that's structural too. So it's just not as pretty.
I gotta tell you a little story, and then we can be done. But my wife and I built a home next to Glen's, about a half mile away, 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago, and I was the owner-builder, so I was doing a lot of it myself. And I went into the hardware store that Glen owns, and I was looking for some part, some piece, some sort of bolt, and Glen was there. And I hadn't met Glen before. And he was there, and I knew he was blind, and I asked him about this piece, and he said, let me see it. And I put it in his hand, and he walked right to the bin where it was. He said, this is what you're looking for, right? And I was just, it blew my mind that he knew his store that well. It was just crazy.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
Yeah, but David, they moved everything around.
Well, when we designed it, then I designed all the pegboard, and I told them exactly what I want in every 4-foot section, and it's 20,000 square feet, so it's pretty good size. But we had a lot of stuff. We have 40,000 items, but
Where's your store at?
Mount Pleasant, Horseshoe Mountain Home Center. So yeah.
In fact, I'll bring it up on the map here.
So yeah, we sold it to our son. So yeah. Anyhow, Life's good, you know, and that's the other key. You know, I tell this to the kids. I don't need to tell you guys this, but I always tell the kids when I go training for particularly farm safety classes, I tell those kids, I says, you meet somebody that's deaf or blind, and David's got some nieces that are deaf, and nieces and nephews. They're just like the rest of us, so treat them just like you want to be treated, and you know, and that's the way I take life approach. Life's good. Yeah, I've had some challenges, and it's, you know, but you know what? Life's good, and we make the most of it, and it's how we make what we make with life, no matter what happens to us. And we all have different challenges. Every one of us has different kinds of challenges, but it's how we deal with them that all makes a difference. So it's all good. I always loved equipment, and I like to build trucks. I built everything on this thing. I shortened the front axle 8 inches. I actually had a guy in Idaho weld that up for me, but then I redid all the everything's completely different. There's not anything on the truck that I haven't touched, except the internals of the motor. I haven't. Well, that's not true. We put Jake brakes on it and everything else, so it's got Jakes on all 16 cylinders. So.
Thanks.
Anyway, thanks guys. Appreciate it.